He was sworn to enforce order. But what happens when the guard becomes the chaos? A forbidden affair, a brutal murder, a life shattered by a secret so dangerous he would kill to bury it. One mistake, one lie, and everything he's built is on the line. How far would you go to protect the truth? When it's the weapon pointing straight at you. The walls were supposed to keep him safe, but this time, they're the ones watching. Welcome to True Crime Uncovered Stories. Here, the truth never dies. It only waits to be uncovered. Like, share, and subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this one. Michael Anderson had a perfect life, a family, a career. But the moment his eyes met Tyler Holt's, everything fell apart. He had always been the model correctional officer, tough, disciplined, and respected by both inmates and fellow officers. But his life took a dramatic turn when he crossed paths with Tyler Holt, a young inmate whose charm and defiance would draw him into a dangerous game he wasn't prepared to play. Before that moment, Michael was everything a correctional facility could ask for. He walked the halls of McKinley Correctional Facility like a man carved from iron, precise in his movements, sharp in his decisions, and feared just enough to keep the most notorious inmates in line. In 18 years of service, he had never been written up, never raised his voice unnecessarily, and never, not once, allowed emotion to interfere with duty. To outsiders, he was the embodiment of order. To his colleagues, he was the officer you wanted beside you during a riot. To the prison administration, he was one promotion away from being the next warden. And to his family, he was untouchable. Off-duty, Michael Anderson transformed into the quiet suburban father who belonged on church brochures. He lived in a peaceful neighborhood with trimmed lawns and well-kept driveways. His wife, Sarah, had been with him since his Army days. 18 years of marriage, unwavering loyalty, and a woman who believed her husband was incapable of sin. They had 2 children, Lucas, a high school athlete who idolized his father's career in law enforcement, and Emma, his soft-spirited 12-year-old daughter who still ran into his arms whenever he came home. On Sundays, Michael dressed clean, sat in the front row of Grace Baptist Church, and was sometimes invited to lead opening prayers. When the pastor spoke about morality, leadership, protection, Michael didn't just listen. He fit the image, the perfect officer, the perfect husband, the perfect father. Nobody, not a single person, had a reason to doubt him. Everything about Michael was calculated. His house, his speech, his posture, even the way he placed his service belt on the nightstand every evening. Control wasn't just part of the job, it was part of his identity. He corrected others, he prevented chaos. He was the wall that separated order from collapse. That's why no one, ever, would have imagined that the most dangerous thing Michael was fighting was himself. At first, Michael didn't recognize what was happening inside him. It started small, a feeling he could label as irritation, something easy to deny. Tyler Holt wasn't the first defiant inmate he'd encountered, but there was something different about him, something that tested Michael in a way no inmate ever had. A stare that lasted a second too long, a voice that sounded like mockery but felt like understanding, a confidence that wasn't reckless, but controlled. Tyler wasn't loud. He wasn't violent. He was exactly what Michael had spent his life becoming, and that made him dangerous. Michael tried to shake it off. He told himself it was just another disciplinary problem, another ego that needed breaking. But there was a split second, an unexplainable, undeniable shift, where irritation morphed into interest. And that terrified him. From the outside, nothing changed. Michael still checked every perimeter, logged every report, held his usual stone-faced authority. But something invisible had shifted. He was thinking about an inmate long after locking his cell. He was replaying conversations that shouldn't have mattered. He was noticing details, how Tyler walked, how he smiled, how he didn't flinch. Thoughts Michael should never be thinking. Thoughts that could end him, inside the controlled life he had built like a fortress. A crack had silently formed. Something he could not allow to widen, something he could never admit. And yet, it did widen. Michael found himself lingering just a second longer during routine rounds, noticing if Tyler looked back, watching for the slightest reaction, convincing himself it was surveillance, risk assessment, tactical awareness, lies, the kind only a man trained to bury emotion knows how to tell himself. At home, Sarah noticed tensed shoulders, but believed it was just work stress. His teenage son talked excitedly about applying to the police academy, and Michael pretended to be proud. Sunday mornings at the church became heavier, not because of guilt, but because of the fear of being seen, not by the congregation, by God. Because if the slightest truth ever surfaced, everything he had built, everything he had sworn to protect, everything that made him Michael Anderson, would detonate. And the one person who unknowingly held the trigger was already waiting on the other side of a prison door. Tyler Holt was 23 years old, but in the world of McKinley Correctional Facility, he might as well have been a legend. Known for his street smarts, charm, and defiant attitude, Tyler was a young man who didn't just survive in prison, he thrived. His reputation didn't come from brute strength or the ability to fight. It came from something far more dangerous, his mind. Tyler had been arrested for armed robbery at the age of 19. The charge had sent him to prison, but that wasn't the real reason he was unforgettable. What made Tyler stand out, what made him dangerous, was the way he carried himself, the way he commanded respect even when he had nothing but his wits and a sly smile. Prison is a place where power is currency, and Tyler had it in abundance. He wasn't the biggest or the toughest inmate, but he was the most calculated. He knew how to get under the skin of the people who ran the prison, both the guards and the other inmates. He was a master manipulator, weaving his way through the prison system with ease. Tyler never shied away from confrontation, but his approach was never reckless. Instead, he was strategic, a chess player in a game where most people were just reacting with instinct. He knew how to make alliances with the right people, how to play one faction against another, how to win favors and get what he needed. He was resourceful, always 2 steps ahead of everyone around him. And there was something about him, something magnetic, that people couldn't help but gravitate toward. Even the hardened criminals, the ones who ran the prison's underground network, respected him. They knew not to cross him. And the guards? They despised him, but even they couldn't deny the power he held in his ability to manipulate situations to his advantage. Despite his violent past, Tyler was unapologetically himself. He wasn't afraid to be open about who he was, even in a place where being openly gay could make you a target. If anything, it only seemed to embolden him. He didn't shrink from the whispers or the stares. Instead, he flaunted it. His confident swagger became a symbol in the prison. He was untouchable. In a place like McKinley, where power was often based on physical dominance and fear, Tyler's open defiance was a breath of fresh air for some and a threat to others. He wasn't afraid of anything, including the guards. If anything, his confidence seemed to irk them more, as it challenged the very system they upheld. Tyler had no shame in who he was, and that made him even more dangerous to Michael Anderson, a man who had spent his life building an image based on control and discipline. Michael couldn't understand how someone like Tyler, with all his rebellion and disregard for authority, could exist so openly. In McKinley Correctional Facility, inmates often lived in fear of the guards, but Tyler had flipped that dynamic on its head. Not only did he command the respect of the prison population, but he also knew how to work the system. He understood the weaknesses in the guards, including Michael, and exploited them with ease. He had eyes everywhere, always keeping tabs on who had power and who was vulnerable. He wasn't above making deals with other inmates to secure favors or information, and he had a knack for knowing when to press and when to pull back. Tyler didn't just manipulate inmates, he manipulated the guards as well. The more he made them uncomfortable, the more he tested the boundaries of the prison, the more they were forced to notice him. But it wasn't just about making people uncomfortable, it was about playing them. He knew which guards had a weak spot for him, which ones would turn a blind eye to his schemes, and which ones could be intimidated with just a few words or a subtle smile. When Michael first laid eyes on Tyler, he didn't know what to make of him. Sure, Tyler was another inmate, a young man who'd found himself behind bars. But there was something about the way Tyler carried himself that unnerved Michael. It wasn't just his swagger, his defiance. It was his confidence. Tyler sat in the day room, legs stretched out casually in front of him, surveying the room with an almost predatory gaze. Michael, as always, was on patrol. His eyes met Tyler's for just a moment, but in that brief exchange, Michael felt something stir deep inside him. It was a feeling he quickly pushed aside. Inmates often tested the guards, but this felt different. Tyler's gaze wasn't fearful. It wasn't challenging. It was knowing. Tyler saw Michael, not as an officer of the law, but as something else, something to manipulate. It was the beginning of a psychological game, one Michael didn't even know he had entered. And Tyler? He didn't miss a thing. He recognized Michael for exactly what he was, a man who could be controlled. Tyler didn't need to speak much to make an impact. He didn't have to flaunt his charm overtly. No, he let his presence do the talking. He let his gaze linger on Michael, just a second longer than usual, like he was trying to see past the uniform and into the man behind it. Michael, of course, resisted. He had to. His career, his image, depended on maintaining control. But deep inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening. It was subtle at first, the way Tyler made his skin prickle with unease. It was in the way Tyler could make any room feel smaller, the way his eyes always seemed to be watching, evaluating, probing. Michael's internal defense mechanisms kicked into overdrive. Stay professional. Keep your distance. Yet, the longer Tyler remained in the facility, the harder it became to ignore him. The attraction was undeniable, but it was more than just physical. Tyler wasn't simply another inmate. He was an idea, a challenge to everything Michael had ever known, a living representation of the chaos that Michael had spent his entire life controlling. And the more he saw of Tyler, the more he felt himself slipping. Michael had seen countless inmates come and go during his years at McKinley Correctional Facility, but the first time he noticed Tyler Holt was different. It wasn't a confrontation or a disciplinary issue, as Michael had become accustomed to. It wasn't a moment of chaos or a riot he had to break up. It was a simple, quiet moment in the prison day room, where the hum of chatter and the clinking of metal trays blended into a dull background noise. Tyler was seated in the corner of the room, his body relaxed yet assertive, leaning back in a plastic chair as if he owned the place. His posture was casual, but there was a certain commanding presence about him, something that wasn't so easily dismissed. He had one leg stretched out in front of him, the other propped up casually on the table, his arms crossed loosely behind his head. Tyler didn't seem to care that his very demeanor screamed of rebellion. He wore confidence the way some wore their best clothes, with ease and flair. For a moment, Michael just watched. It wasn't something he would admit to anyone, but the truth was undeniable. There was something about Tyler. The way he carried himself was different from the other inmates. Most men locked in the same position as Tyler were usually defensive or marked by a sense of weariness. Not Tyler. He didn't seem broken. He seemed alive, with an energy that drew Michael's attention despite his best efforts to remain professional. And then it happened, the moment that would change everything. Tyler's eyes met Michael's. The look was immediate. Tyler held Michael's gaze, just for a second too long. There was no aggression in it, no mockery. Instead, there was a flicker of curiosity, a kind of knowing that Michael wasn't sure he was ready to acknowledge. It was as if Tyler had recognized him, not as an officer, but as something else, something deeper. For a split second, Michael felt his breath hitch. Why did it feel like Tyler could see right through him? Michael quickly dismissed it. No one could see through him. He was a professional. He'd been a guard for nearly 2 decades. He'd seen it all. The tricks, the games, the inmates trying to manipulate the system. Tyler was just another inmate, and this moment, however unsettling, was nothing more than a coincidence. He turned away quickly, focusing on the rounds he had to complete, telling himself that the lingering feeling in his chest was just a result of being too tired. It was just one of those days. He hadn't had a good night's sleep, and this place, with its grime and tension, sometimes played tricks on his mind. But no matter how much he tried to rationalize it, he couldn't shake the feeling that lingered in his gut. As the days passed, Michael couldn't ignore the quiet magnetism between them. It wasn't an overt challenge or confrontation. Tyler didn't approach Michael or go out of his way to provoke him. Instead, Tyler would find moments, subtle moments, where their paths crossed. A brief exchange of glances in the hallway, an almost imperceptible smile as Michael passed by, or a slight shift in posture whenever Michael was near. Each time, Michael would feel it. The tension. The way Tyler didn't shrink from his gaze. The way he didn't show any fear when Michael looked at him, as though Tyler knew something Michael didn't. The control Michael had prided himself on for so long began to fray, bit by bit. He was being tested, and it wasn't the first time. Inmates had tested him before. But not like this. Not with this strange pull, this strange curiosity that gnawed at him. Michael continued to rationalize it. Tyler was just another inmate with a big mouth, just another young man trying to get under his skin. He had seen his type before, disruptive, charming, defiant. But Tyler was different. Michael couldn't quite figure out why or how, but he could feel it. Something was happening, something that Michael could not ignore. One late evening, during a routine patrol, Michael's steps led him back to the day room. His shift was winding down, and he was almost looking forward to heading home, to the familiar comfort of his wife, Sarah, and their 2 kids. But as soon as he walked in, he saw Tyler sitting in the same spot. This time his legs were sprawled out lazily, his head tilted back as if in deep thought, though he seemed to be fully aware of Michael's presence. As Michael walked past, Tyler's eyes flicked up, meeting his with that same unnerving, knowing gaze. There was no mocking, no sarcasm, just something that felt like connection. Michael's heart skipped, and for a second he almost forgot where he was. He turned to keep walking, but caught himself. Number. What the hell was happening? He forced himself to focus on his duties, to remind himself of the job at hand. But in that brief moment, Michael felt something stirring inside him. Desire? It wasn't the kind of desire he had felt for a woman. It was different. Tyler was dangerous. That was what Michael tried to tell himself. The danger was what made him feel this way. The feeling of powerlessness. That was what had triggered the tension. Because unlike other inmates, Tyler had a hold on Michael. He could feel it in the air, just beneath his uniform. The more Michael tried to avoid Tyler, the more it seemed Tyler was everywhere. Tyler had a way of appearing at just the right, or wrong, moment. During early morning shifts, when Michael would make his rounds, Tyler was often lounging in the common area, half observing, half relaxing, but always aware of Michael's presence. Their interactions became brief, but they were enough to stir something deeper inside Michael, something he didn't want to confront. He couldn't stop thinking about it, about Tyler, about the feeling of being drawn to him, despite knowing that everything about it was wrong. Michael was a married man, a respected officer. He didn't get involved with inmates. That was not who he was. But the more Michael dismissed it, the more the tension grew. It wasn't just about the physical attraction. It was something more. Tyler's confidence, his self-assuredness, his ability to challenge the boundaries of everything Michael stood for, made him irresistible in ways Michael had never encountered. What would it feel like to be that free? Michael wondered. To have that kind of power? And just as quickly, he would slap the thought away. This couldn't happen. Days turned into weeks, and the unspoken game between Michael and Tyler escalated. Michael would catch himself lingering too long during routine checks, his gaze darting back to Tyler's cell. Tyler's knowing smile was like an unspoken dare, a challenge that Michael couldn't seem to shake. Tyler wasn't the one who pushed, not directly. He never needed to. His presence alone was enough. It was like Tyler was quietly testing Michael, knowing that the more he pushed the boundaries, the more Michael would be drawn to him. Each encounter was like a small, dangerous spark, the kind that could catch fire if given the chance. And Michael, despite all his experience and control, couldn't stop it. The more he resisted, the stronger the pull became. Tyler had crossed a line, but Michael was the one who couldn't seem to stop stepping closer to it. Michael had never been a man to give in to temptation. He had spent his life adhering to the principles of discipline, order, and control. The life he had built, the reputation he had worked so hard to maintain, had always been defined by these things. The rules were everything. They were the foundation of his success, the bedrock on which he had built his career, his family, his entire identity. But somewhere, in the quiet moments of the night, when the prison's fluorescent lights flickered above and the walls hummed with the distant voices of the inmates, something began to crack. Tyler's presence was like a slow, deliberate poison. At first, it was subtle. A glance here, a remark there. Tyler would find ways to get close to Michael in the corridors, his voice low and teasing, daring Michael to notice him. He didn't overtly challenge Michael. He simply existed in a way that left Michael feeling exposed, vulnerable. It wasn't long before Tyler began pushing boundaries in a way Michael couldn't ignore. The first time Tyler made a direct move was during a routine late-night patrol. Michael was walking the halls, keeping to his regular rounds, when he turned the corner and saw Tyler standing there, leaning casually against the wall. Tyler's eyes were locked on him, intense and calculating. He smiled, the kind of smile that made the hairs on the back of Michael's neck stand up. It wasn't just the smile of an inmate. It was the smile of someone who knew he had control. "You know, you look much more comfortable out of your uniform," Tyler said, his voice laced with a playful edge. Michael's heart skipped, but he didn't let it show. Keep it professional. He forced himself to look away and continue his patrol. But the seed was planted. It happened a few nights later, in the dimly lit hallway behind the staff break room. Michael had just finished his rounds and was walking back to the guard office when Tyler appeared out of nowhere. The encounter was accidental, but neither of them acted like it. Michael tried to walk past him, but Tyler stopped him with a subtle hand on his arm. "You know, I've been thinking about that day in the day room," Tyler began, his voice barely a whisper. "You never really looked at me the same way after that, did you?" Michael froze. He had been trying to forget that first moment, the moment when everything started shifting. But now, with Tyler standing so close, with the faint scent of his cologne mixing with the prison air, the memory resurfaced, stronger than ever. "What are you talking about?" Michael said, his voice tight. Tyler smirked, that same cocky grin that always seemed to push Michael to the edge. "You know exactly what I mean. I've seen the way you look at me. It's not just discipline you're holding on to, is it?" Michael's pulse quickened. He should pull away, should walk past Tyler and keep to his professional boundaries. But he couldn't. The tension was palpable. The line had already been crossed, and Michael knew it. Without thinking, his hand moved slightly, just enough to brush against Tyler's arm. It was a mistake, but it felt like an invitation. The air between them thickened, charged with a dangerous energy that Michael couldn't escape. Tyler leaned in just enough that Michael could feel the heat of his breath against his skin. "It's just a little game, Officer Anderson. But you're starting to play it too." The following days became a blur of stolen moments and whispered exchanges. Michael tried to resist, but it was harder each time. Tyler's advances were subtle at first, designed to keep him on edge, but they were impossible to ignore. The late-night checks turned into long conversations hidden behind the storage closets, the empty hallways, and the unused rooms where only the shadows bore witness to the forbidden attraction. Michael told himself it was just a lapse in judgment, just one mistake. He justified it with all the reasoning his disciplined mind could muster. He was tired, stressed, overwhelmed by the pressure of his duties. One moment of weakness couldn't destroy him, right? "It's just talking. Just a little flirtation," he told himself. But deep down, Michael knew it wasn't just talking. It wasn't just a mistake. This was something more. It was an emotional pull, a need he hadn't known existed, buried beneath years of rigidity and control. The loneliness of his life outside of the prison walls, the monotony of his marriage with Sarah, it all began to bleed into his interactions with Tyler. There was an escape in Tyler's confidence, an escape in the rawness of what they shared in those fleeting moments. But Tyler wasn't just testing Michael. Tyler knew exactly what he was doing. He was pushing Michael, prodding him, making him question everything he thought he knew about himself. Michael didn't realize it at first, but Tyler had been manipulating him from the very beginning. Every glance, every word, they were all calculated moves designed to draw Michael deeper into his web. And Tyler wasn't just using his charm. He used Michael's sense of duty against him, twisting it into something that felt even more forbidden. "I know you're better than the others, Officer Anderson," Tyler had whispered one night, his hand just grazing Michael's waist as they stood outside the solitary confinement unit. "You're not like them. You're better. You don't have to follow all the rules." Michael felt the weight of the words press down on him. He wanted to reject them, to step away, but instead, he found himself lingering, savoring the praise that Tyler had offered so casually. "It's just a conversation," Michael whispered to himself. But it wasn't just a conversation anymore. It was a connection he had never allowed himself to experience. Michael's nights became a mixture of guilt and desire. Each stolen moment with Tyler felt like a dangerous indulgence, a decision he knew he shouldn't make, but couldn't stop. The more Tyler pushed, the more Michael gave in. The rules became blurred. His sense of duty as an officer, his image as the model prison guard, it all started to unravel. Tyler knew how to manipulate the cracks in his resolve, how to press the buttons that made Michael question everything. The moments between them grew longer, more intimate. Tyler's flirtations turned into something deeper, a connection that neither could fully name, but both felt. Michael's heart pounded each time he saw Tyler's name on his patrol list. "Just one more time," he told himself. "Just one more stolen moment." But each moment brought him closer to something darker, something he was trying to deny. For weeks, Michael had pushed the growing sense of unease deep into the corners of his mind, trying to convince himself that the strange fatigue, the night sweats, and the constant aches were just side effects of stress. His job, the pressure, the constant tug-of-war between his duty and the dangerous affair with Tyler, it had all worn him down. He convinced himself it was just that. But as the days went by, something inside him knew it was more than just stress. He woke up one morning drenched in sweat, his body trembling even under the cool sheets. Another night of restless sleep. But this time, the pain in his joints felt different. His muscles ached as if he hadn't slept at all. The fatigue was relentless, and he could barely get out of bed, let alone complete his routine rounds at the prison. Tyler. The name flickered through his mind like a lightning bolt. Could it be him? Could it be the affair? No, he told himself. That was impossible. He couldn't even entertain that thought. But as the days stretched on and the symptoms worsened, the quiet suspicion in the back of Michael's mind began to grow louder. He was scared, but he refused to admit it. He couldn't. He was a man of discipline, not someone who allowed fear to take over. It was a routine physical, a quick screening that Michael had brushed off time and again. But when the fatigue became unbearable and the sweats turned into chills that made his teeth rattle, he knew he had no choice. He couldn't hide from it anymore. Michael walked into the prison medical facility with his head held high, trying to act normal, but his gut was telling him otherwise. The nurse, a young woman who had known him for years, barely looked up as she prepped him for the usual tests. The needle went in without ceremony, a small pinch, and then it was over. It wasn't until 3 days later that the phone call came. The moment the words HIV positive hit his ears, Michael felt his world tilt on its axis. His breath caught, and the weight of the words crashed down on him with brutal force. For a split second, Michael couldn't process what he had just heard. His body went cold. The voice on the other end of the phone continued speaking, but Michael couldn't focus on the words. He couldn't make sense of it. HIV. He wasn't supposed to be here. He had been careful. He'd been smart. But deep inside, in a place he didn't want to face, the answer was clear. The affair. Tyler. It wasn't just the affair. It was everything he had ignored. Everything he had convinced himself was just a temporary lapse in judgment. Now, as the truth hit him full force, it felt like a slap in the face. Tyler, the very man he had been unable to resist, the man who had invaded every corner of his life, was the source of his infection. Michael's heart raced as panic surged through him. He immediately associated the infection with Tyler because in his mind there was only one place he could have contracted it. From Tyler's touch, his whispered promises, his teasing smiles. He couldn't remember how many times Tyler had gotten so close, had brushed against him, had held him in ways Michael had told himself were innocent. But now, in the cold light of this revelation, those touches felt like betrayal. Tyler had known, hadn't he? The idea that Tyler, in all his cocky, charming defiance, had walked into his life and completely torn it apart made Michael's blood run cold. Tyler had done this to me, he thought. Tyler had destroyed everything I had worked for. As the day wore on, Michael felt himself slipping further into despair. His thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion, guilt, and rage. The guilt was suffocating in a way he had never known before. He couldn't bring himself to face the shame. The man he had been, the model officer, the man who had upheld the law with pride, was now the very thing he despised. The rage began to simmer beneath the surface, and Michael couldn't suppress it. He clenched his fists so tight his knuckles turned white, his jaw aching from the tension. He had always been the one in control, the one who maintained order, who disciplined the inmates. But now, the walls of his carefully constructed life were crumbling. He had broken the rules, let his emotions cloud his judgment, and now he was paying the price. And the worst part? He had no one to blame but himself. The anger surged again, but this time, it wasn't just aimed at himself. It was aimed at Tyler. Tyler, who had walked into his life and shattered everything. His career, his family, his moral compass. Tyler had made him weak, made him vulnerable. Tyler was the source of everything that was now falling apart. Michael couldn't think straight. The panic had begun to twist into obsession. Every moment of the affair, every touch, every word Tyler had whispered in his ear now haunted him like a ghost. As Michael sat in the dim light of his office that night, his mind racing, the weight of his own actions crushed him. His marriage to Sarah, everything he had worked for, everything he had claimed to protect, was now a lie. If Sarah found out, if anyone found out, It would destroy him. His family, his colleagues, his reputation, all of it would be reduced to nothing. The guilt and shame overpowered his every thought. He couldn't face his wife. He couldn't face his children. He couldn't face anyone. The only thing that mattered was keeping the secret buried, keeping the world from knowing who he had become, who he had allowed himself to be. Michael's mind was no longer his own. The constant barrage of thoughts, guilt, rage, fear, had drowned out every ounce of rationality he once held dear. The man who had lived a life of discipline, a life that had once been marked by order and control, was now a slave to his emotions. The truth about what he had done, what he had allowed himself to become, gnawed at him like an insatiable hunger. He was HIV positive, and Tyler Holt, the young inmate he had fallen for, was the only person who could have given it to him. Michael didn't need the doctor's words to know it. The evidence was clear. Tyler's smile, his words, his touch. Tyler had destroyed his life, and now the reality was so vivid, so suffocating, that Michael could barely breathe under its weight. But Tyler knew too much. He was a loose end that Michael couldn't afford to let slip. If anyone found out about the affair, about the secret life Michael had been living behind the walls of the prison, it would be over. His career, his marriage, his reputation as the perfect family man, and the worst part? Tyler had control. Michael could feel it every time their eyes met. Tyler knew the power he held, the way he could twist Michael's world with just a look, just a comment. Tyler could ruin him. He had to be silenced. The thoughts spiraled. Michael's desperate mind worked quickly, obsessively, in those silent hours when he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He had to kill Tyler. It was the only way to protect himself, to protect his family, to keep everything intact. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became. Michael was no stranger to violence. He had been trained for it in the military, and his job at McKinley Correctional Facility often put him in situations that required force. But this was different. This wasn't about protecting the law or the safety of others. This was about protecting himself. He planned it carefully. A routine patrol, the same one he had done 1,000 times before. But this time, there would be no mistakes, no hesitation. No one would know what had really happened. He would make it look like self-defense, a simple case of an inmate attacking a guard. He could justify it to the prison, to his wife, and to everyone who had trusted him. He chose the night shift, when the prison was quieter, fewer witnesses, the perfect cover. The cold concrete floors echoed under Michael's boots as he walked the empty halls of McKinley Correctional Facility. His heart was pounding in his chest, his palms sweating inside his gloves, but his mind was clear. This was the plan. This was the way out. Michael had the gun hidden in his jacket, tucked against his side where no one could see it. It was a small revolver, not much larger than a pen, perfect for what he needed. He had made sure the chambers were loaded, just enough to end the problem for good. Tyler Holt wouldn't stand a chance. Tyler's cell came into view. The soft light from the overhead bulbs filtered down, casting long shadows across the hallway. Michael slowed his pace as he approached the door, feeling a tightening in his chest. His hands trembled slightly, but his resolve was stronger than the fear. Tyler was sitting on his cot as usual. His legs were stretched out and he was reading a book. He didn't notice Michael at first. But then, as if sensing his presence, Tyler's eyes slowly rose, locking onto Michael's. There was that same unsettling smile, the one that always made Michael feel exposed, like Tyler knew something he didn't. For a moment, Michael stood frozen in the doorway, the weight of the gun in his hand pulling him down. But then Tyler spoke, breaking the silence between them. "You're late tonight, officer," Tyler said, his voice casual but carrying an unmistakable undertone of taunting. "Couldn't sleep, huh? Or are you just tired of pretending?" Michael swallowed hard, but he forced himself to keep his composure. This was it. No turning back now. "I'm here to check your cell, Tyler," Michael replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Routine inspection." Tyler's eyes narrowed slightly, but the grin didn't fade. He stood up slowly, his movements deliberate. "Routine, huh?" he said, walking toward the bars. "You sure?" "Because it doesn't seem like it." The air between them crackled with tension. Michael could feel his pulse in his neck, the heat, building inside him. He couldn't stop his mind from racing. Was this the moment? Was Tyler going to make a move, force him to react? Or was this just another game? Tyler stepped closer to the bars, leaning forward as if he were examining Michael. "You know, I've been thinking. Maybe we've both been pretending," Tyler said, his voice low, his eyes never leaving Michael's. "But I think I've figured you out." The words hit Michael like a slap. His jaw clenched, and his grip tightened around the handle of the gun hidden in his jacket. "What do you mean?" Michael's voice came out quieter than he had intended. Tyler's grin widened, that knowing smirk still playing at the corners of his lips. "You're scared." "You're scared of what I know. Scared that everyone will find out what you've been doing, what you've become, what I know about you." Michael's breath hitched. He could feel the weight of Tyler's words pressing down on him. He knew Tyler was pushing, testing him, trying to break him. And for a second, Michael almost gave in to the temptation to answer, to confess it all. But he knew he couldn't. Tyler had to die. Michael took a slow step forward, his eyes locked on Tyler's, his hand moving to his jacket. In the next instant, the gun was out, aimed directly at Tyler's chest. Tyler froze. The cocky grin faltered for just a moment as he looked down at the barrel of the gun. But he didn't move. He didn't flinch. Instead, he stared at Michael, his expression still unreadable. "You really think you can just end this, don't you?" Tyler asked, his voice almost sympathetic. "You can't outrun the truth, officer." Bang! The shot rang out, louder than the pounding of Michael's heart. Tyler's body jerked back, his eyes wide with shock, his hands reaching for his chest. He collapsed to the ground, the blood spreading across the floor like a dark pool. Michael stood frozen, the weight of the gun heavy in his hand, his body trembling as the world around him seemed to slow down. Tyler's life drained away in front of him, and for a long moment, Michael could only stare. The truth was now undeniable. Michael had crossed the line. He had become the very thing he had fought so hard to control. His hand was still shaking. The gun felt foreign in his palm. The man who had prided himself on his control, on his order, had just committed murder. Michael stepped back, his feet unsteady beneath him. The weight of what he had just done crashed down on him like a wave. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. The room felt too small, too suffocating. He had killed Tyler. In cold blood. Michael stood over Tyler's body, the silence in the cell deafening. His heart pounded painfully in his chest. There was no going back. The life he had built, the reputation, the family, the career, all of it was now shattered. And for what? To protect a secret? To erase the consequences of his own actions? He quickly wiped the gun with a cloth and shoved it back into his jacket, his movements jerky. He locked the cell door behind him, the sound of the lock clicking loud in his ears. But the crime was done. There was no hiding from it now. Michael had just crossed the point of no return. He had become the criminal. The gunshot echoed long after the air had gone still, reverberating in Michael's mind. Tyler was dead. The cold, lifeless body sprawled on the prison floor was a testament to the irreversible decision Michael had made. For the first time since the murder, he stood there, staring down at the result of his own frantic, desperate choice. The weight of the gun in his hand, the tremor in his fingers, everything felt wrong. But it was done. There was no turning back. Michael's mind raced. the haze of panic clouding his every thought. What now? The question hit him like a hammer. He had just killed an inmate who had, by all accounts, been trouble for the guards, for the system. Surely no one would question the action. No one would question him, not after all these years of dutiful service. He began to piece together a story, a clean alibi, a narrative he could control, one that would allow him to walk away unscathed. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Self-defense. He had been forced to act in the line of duty, to protect himself from an inmate who had turned violent. Michael knew the script. He'd seen it play out 100 times before. Inmates were aggressive. Guards responded. Simple. It didn't matter that the truth was more complicated, that the tension had been building for weeks, that his emotions had gotten the better of him. Michael was a pragmatist, and the story he would tell was straightforward. Tyler attacked him, and he had no choice but to act. He would keep it simple. He would keep it clean. But no amount of self-deception could prepare Michael for the one thing he hadn't accounted for, the security footage. The prison had cameras everywhere, hallways, cells, common areas. They were always recording, always watching. There was no way the footage would support his story, or was there? As the reality of what he had done began to settle on him, Michael walked to the security office the next morning trying to look as calm and composed as possible. He needed to check the footage, make sure everything lined up with the story he planned to tell. He couldn't afford any surprises. Not now. The head of security, Officer Jenkins, greeted him with a nod as Michael entered. "Routine check?" Jenkins asked, not thinking twice about the request. Michael's heart skipped a beat as Jenkins pulled up the video footage for the night of the murder. He held his breath as the screen flickered to life, the timestamp clearly showing the hours of the night shift. He saw himself walking down the hall, making his rounds, checking doors, passing by cells. But then the screen went dark. For a solid 10 minutes, the footage was completely corrupt. Michael's stomach dropped. His mind raced. How? This wasn't possible. The cameras didn't malfunction. The system didn't just glitch at the exact moment Tyler was killed. This was intentional. Someone had tampered with the footage. The air felt suddenly thin, as if the walls of the prison were closing in on him. Michael turned to Jenkins, his voice tight, masking the panic that was creeping up from his gut. "What happened to the footage?" "It's supposed to be on file." Jenkins furrowed his brow, but Michael noticed his hesitation. "It's strange," Jenkins admitted, turning the screen towards him. "The security feed cut out. Looks like a glitch. We're looking into it now, but the system's been acting up." Michael's hands clenched at his sides, his knuckles going white. Glitch? He had been caught in a lie before it even started. There was no way that was a coincidence. How had it happened? Did someone know? Did someone tamper with the system to protect him or to make sure the truth stayed hidden? The tension inside him grew unbearable. He needed time. Time to fix this, to cover his tracks before anyone noticed. Michael left the security office as quickly as he could, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. The footage was gone, but the truth about his actions couldn't stay buried forever. His thoughts spiraled as he moved through the prison halls, and it wasn't long before he started hearing the whispers. The inmates, they were already talking. "Did you hear about what happened last night?" "I saw Anderson at Tyler's cell. He went in just before everything went quiet. They say he was the one who killed him. Shot him in cold blood." The murmurs carried down the halls, catching Michael's ear at every turn. The prisoners knew. They weren't just whispering. They were speculating. And if the word spread to the wrong ears, everything he had worked so hard to cover up would come crumbling down. Michael quickened his pace. They couldn't know. Not yet. The next few days were a blur of sweat and nervous glances. Michael spent every waking hour trying to maintain the facade of the perfect officer, but inside he was cracking. The pressure of keeping his secret and the mounting fear that someone would uncover the truth gnawed at him. Every conversation, every glance felt like an interrogation. Tyler was dead. Michael had killed him. And now, the walls were closing in. The missing footage, the rumors, the whispers, they were all adding up. Someone would figure it out. And when they did, Michael would lose everything. His job, his family, the life he had spent years building. It wasn't long before the prison's internal investigation kicked into gear. Detective Angela Ramirez, a sharp-eyed investigator with a reputation for digging deeper than most, was assigned to the case. Michael had heard the whispers about her. She didn't miss a thing. As the days wore on, he could feel the tension tightening around him like a noose. Angela Ramirez was everywhere. Questions were everywhere. And the cracks in his story were beginning to show. There were no witnesses to the shooting, just his word against an empty cell. But the whispers from the inmates were growing louder, and as Michael sat in his office, reviewing his reports, he couldn't help but wonder, would she see through the lies? Would she piece together the truth before he could finish the cover-up? The days following Tyler's death were filled with a heavy, suffocating silence at McKinley Correctional Facility. The prison seemed to be holding its breath, as though waiting for something to break the surface. Michael's world had shrunk to the narrow confines of his office and his carefully controlled routine, but deep inside, he could feel the weight of the inevitable creeping closer. And then, Detective Angela Ramirez walked in. Ramirez was known for one thing: her relentlessness. She had a reputation for seeing through lies, for connecting dots that others overlooked. She had worked in internal affairs long enough to recognize when things didn't add up, and when she arrived at McKinley Correctional Facility to oversee the investigation into Tyler Holt's murder, Michael knew he was in trouble. She wasn't tall, but she carried herself with an air of quiet confidence. Her sharp eyes scanned the room like a hawk surveying its prey, and Michael could feel her gaze on him even before she spoke. The tension in the air thickened, and the truth, or rather the potential truth, began to creep into Michael's consciousness. There was no more hiding. The investigation had begun, and there was no escaping the scrutiny. As Ramirez pored over the reports, Michael sat in her office, watching her with barely contained anxiety. She was methodical, precise in her approach. She didn't miss a thing. "Let's start with the basics," Ramirez said, her voice cool but steady. She flipped through the case files, her eyes scanning the documents. "Officer Anderson, you claim that Tyler Holt was violent, that he attacked you, and you acted in self-defense. But there's something that doesn't sit right with that story." Michael's stomach dropped. He had been expecting this moment, but he hadn't anticipated how clinical it would feel. There was no anger in her tone, no rush to conclusions. Instead, she was like a puzzle solver, methodically pulling at the loose threads to reveal the bigger picture. "The missing security footage," Ramirez continued, her eyes locking onto Michael's. "You said it was a glitch. Yet there's a gap in the timeline, a gap that coincides with the time of the shooting. You're telling me that the entire security system malfunctioned during the exact moment of Tyler Holt's death? That's quite convenient." Michael's heart raced as he gripped the armrests of the chair, trying to keep his composure. The footage had always been his biggest concern. He had expected that someone would catch the gap eventually, but how did she know? "It wasn't a glitch," he muttered, forcing the words out, his voice shaky. "The system's old. Sometimes it malfunctions." Ramirez didn't respond immediately, instead taking her time to absorb his words, her expression unreadable. She turned her attention to the next set of files, the medical reports. As Ramirez dug deeper into the records, she uncovered the relevant medical history, both for Tyler and for Michael. Her eyes skimmed the documents, picking out the small details that seemed inconsequential to others, but were crucial to her. Tyler Holt was tested for HIV about 3 weeks before his death, she remarked, her voice tinged with curiosity. The results came back negative. No sign of the virus. Michael felt his stomach lurch, the room spinning slightly. Negative. How could it be? That changed everything. She turned to him, eyes narrowing. How do you explain that, Officer Anderson? If Tyler was HIV negative, how could you have contracted the virus from him? The walls around Michael closed in. He had prepared for this moment, had thought of every possible scenario in which he could justify the murder. But this was different. He had assumed Tyler was the source, the only logical person who could have infected him. But now, Ramirez had exposed a fatal flaw in his plan. For a brief moment, Michael thought about lying, fabricating another story, another excuse. But he saw the truth written across her face. She wasn't looking for a convenient answer. She was looking for the truth. The silence stretched between them, and Michael's breathing became shallow. Every word Ramirez spoke felt like a hammer striking the truth into his chest. He had killed Tyler. But it hadn't been to protect his health. It had been to cover up an affair, to silence a secret that could destroy him. Michael's mind spun as he tried to reconcile the lies he had built with the truth that was now emerging. His head was pounding, his thoughts scattered. He had known, deep down, that the affair with Tyler wasn't just a lapse in judgment. But it was easier to lie to himself than to face the fact that he had murdered someone to protect his own shame. The guilt was suffocating. The weight of his own actions pressed down on him, and all he could think of was his family, his perfect life, his reputation as a law-abiding officer. In one violent moment, it had all come crashing down. Ramirez didn't flinch as she continued to piece together the puzzle. She didn't need to accuse him outright. She was letting the evidence speak for itself. You killed him to protect yourself, Ramirez said softly, but there was no question in her voice. She knew. And now, so did Michael. Michael's throat tightened, and his eyes burned with unshed tears, but he couldn't speak. The truth was no longer a choice. He had crossed the line. The emotional weight of the investigation was intense, and Michael felt himself unraveling. Every step Ramirez took brought him closer to the brink. His guilt was suffocating. Desperation replaced any hope of defense. There was no way to cover this up. No convenient excuse left to offer. He was exposed, and the world he had built, the world he had fought so hard to maintain, was now shattered beyond repair. The investigation was no longer just a formal procedure. It had become a matter of survival. Michael felt the desperation rise like a tidal wave inside him. What could he do now? How could he explain his actions? How could he ever make this right? The moment Michael Anderson was arrested, the weight of everything he had done came crashing down on him like a tidal wave. The life he had built, the reputation, the career, the family, was no more than a fragile illusion. All the years of discipline, control, and order he had so carefully crafted were now exposed as the house of cards they had always been. The prison system he once upheld now rejected him as a criminal. The walls that had once been a symbol of his authority now felt like a cage, and Michael was just another inmate, a fallen officer stripped of everything he had once taken pride in. The arrest came swiftly, and there was no time for denial or rationalization. When Detective Ramirez and a team of officers arrived at Michael's home, he had known the end was near. His life, as he had known it, was over. He had been expecting it, but the cold reality of seeing his name in handcuffs, of feeling the weight of the criminal justice system turn against him, was something entirely different. As the officers read him his rights, he felt a numbness wash over him. No one came to his defense, no sympathetic words from his colleagues, no reassuring gestures from his fellow officers. It was as if he had never existed in their world to begin with. The man who had once been the golden boy of the correctional system was now just another criminal, discarded and forgotten. The faces of his fellow officers were cold, impassive, and Michael knew deep down that they had already written him off. But the worst blow came at home. When Michael's wife, Sarah, found out what had happened, her heart shattered. The truth was unbearable. For 18 years, Sarah had stood by Michael's side, believing he was the man she had married, the strong, dependable officer who had built a life with her. But now, everything she had known about him had turned into a lie. The betrayal was too deep. She couldn't reconcile the man she thought she knew with the monster he had become. It wasn't just the affair. It was the murder. The fact that Michael had taken a life, Tyler Holt's life, to protect a secret, to protect a lie. Sarah packed her things quietly, the silence in their home deafening as she walked out the door. The children, Lucas and Emma, stood frozen, caught in the storm that had erupted in their family. Lucas, once proud of his father's career, couldn't look Michael in the eye. Emma, his youngest, clung to her mother, her innocence shattered by the revelations. They couldn't understand why Michael had done it. They couldn't comprehend how the man they had trusted, the man they had admired, could have fallen so far. With Sarah gone and the children turning their backs on him, Michael was left alone. The house, once full of laughter and love, now felt hollow and empty. Every corner, every room, felt like a reminder of the life he had destroyed. As Michael was led into the courtroom for his trial, the public humiliation had only just begun. The once respected officer, the man who had controlled the lives of inmates and commanded respect from his colleagues, was now a defendant, a criminal being judged by the very system he had once been part of. The trial was a spectacle. News cameras flashed, reporters scribbled furiously, and the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Everyone wanted to see the fall of the man who had been untouchable. Michael's face, once a symbol of control and authority, was now a symbol of disgrace. The evidence stacked up quickly. Detective Ramirez testified, detailing her investigation and exposing Michael's lies. The missing footage, the affair with Tyler, the lack of evidence for his self-defense claim. It all came out in front of the world. Each detail painted a damning picture of the man Michael had become. The defense tried to spin it, tried to paint Michael as a man pushed to the edge by the violence and corruption of the prison system, but the truth was undeniable. Michael had killed Tyler Holt to protect his own secret, to cover up the affair that could destroy him. The motive was clear, and Michael's attempts to justify it felt hollow and weak. The emotional weight of the trial was unbearable. Michael sat in the defendant's chair, his hands shaking, his head bowed as the accusations flew. He had no defense, no way to explain what he had done. He could feel the eyes of the world on him, the world that had once admired him, the world that had trusted him. As the jury deliberated, Michael's thoughts spiraled. His guilt consumed him. He wasn't just a murderer, he had betrayed everyone. Sarah, his children, his colleagues, the very system he had once upheld. They had all been torn apart because of his actions. There was no escape from it now. When the verdict was read, Michael barely heard it. The weight of it hit him like a freight train, and the world around him seemed to spin out of focus. Guilty of first-degree murder. The words echoed in his mind, but he couldn't process them. The life he had built was officially over. The aftermath of the trial was swift and unforgiving. Michael's once respected name was dragged through the mud. His face appeared on news broadcasts, his name in the headlines, a fallen officer, a murderer. The community he had once served turned their backs on him. His colleagues, the men and women he had worked alongside for years, now refused to even acknowledge him. Even the prison system that had once been his domain rejected him. The officers who once trusted him now saw him as nothing more than a liability, a man who had betrayed not just the law, but his own morals. Michael had gone from being the model officer to just another inmate, a criminal. The worst part of it all was how isolated he felt. The people he had trusted, his family, his colleagues, were all gone. And now, as he faced the consequences of his actions, he was left alone to deal with the wreckage he had caused. The finality of Michael Anderson's conviction was like a thunderclap, the kind that shatters the silence of a once quiet world. The courtroom had fallen into a stillness, the weight of guilt, shame, and regret pressing down on everyone present. Michael, once a man of power, a man who had ruled over the lives of inmates with a steady hand, now stood before the court as a convicted murderer, his future forever altered. As the guilty verdict was read, Michael didn't flinch. There was no resistance, no defense left in him. The truth, that he had taken Tyler Holt's life in cold blood to protect his own lies, was undeniable. The man who had once carried himself with pride, who had stood tall in front of his colleagues, was now a mere shell of his former self. His reputation was gone. The prison system that had once been his kingdom had now turned on him, casting him aside as just another inmate. No longer was he the respected officer. No longer was he the man who could command authority. He was the criminal, the fallen man who had betrayed not just the law, but the very people who had trusted him. As Michael was escorted out of the courtroom, the weight of the moment wasn't lost on him. His mind raced back to his wife, Sarah, and his children, Lucas and Emma. They had been his world, his anchor. But now they had abandoned him, turned their backs on him. The image of Sarah walking away, packing her bags, the silence between them growing as she walked out of their home, was burned into his mind. Tyler's death, Michael's affair, and his desperate attempt to cover it all up had destroyed everything he once held dear. There would be no forgiveness from his family, no second chances. Lucas, his son, the one who had once looked up to him, now spoke publicly about his disgust and disbelief. Michael's heart ached with the memory of his son's tearful words on the news. "My father was supposed to protect people, not hurt them," Lucas had said. Michael didn't need to hear it again to know the truth. His family was gone, and he was left to face the wreckage alone. They had once been his greatest source of pride, but now they were just another victim of his own actions. The sentencing was swift. Michael was given life in prison, without parole, a punishment as cold and final as the truth that had consumed him. The prison he had once controlled, the same walls that had echoed with his authority, were now the walls of his own imprisonment. The irony was thick, almost suffocating. He had spent his career controlling the lives of the very people who now stood in judgment of him. He had once believed that the rules of law were inviolable, that he could uphold them without consequence. Now, the very law he had enforced had turned against him, and he was just another inmate. Michael's walk to his new cell was slow, each step heavy with the knowledge that his fate was sealed. The whispers that had once filled the halls of McKinley Correctional Facility, the rumors about him and Tyler, the secrets he had buried, were now public knowledge. The entire world knew who he had become, and there would be no hiding from the truth. As the news of Michael's conviction spread, his public fall from grace became a spectacle. The story of the respected officer turned murderer gripped the media. As Michael's face appeared on every news channel, his name splashed across newspapers. He was no longer a model of law and order. He was a pariah, a cautionary tale for anyone who believed they could control their world without consequences. The truth about his affair with Tyler Holt, the affair that had driven him to murder, was now public. The details of their secret meetings, the escalating tension between them, and the desperate steps Michael had taken to cover up his crime were laid bare for all to see. Michael's guilt, his shame, and his emotional breakdown were no longer hidden. Tyler Holt, the man who had once been his secret obsession, was now a symbol of Michael's moral collapse. Tyler's death had been the result of Michael's attempt to protect a life built on lies, but it had only led to his own destruction. Michael had tried to bury the truth, to erase the evidence of his own moral decay, but the truth always finds a way to come to light. As Michael sat in his cell, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the full weight of his reckoning began to settle in. His life, once full of purpose and order, was now a bleak existence, defined by the walls of his cell. There was no redemption, no second chances. The truth had shattered everything, and Michael was left to confront the ruin he had created. In the end, Michael's story is a tragic reminder that no one is immune to the consequences of their actions. The truth always finds a way to surface, and when it does, it destroys everything in its path. Michael Anderson's life had been defined by his ability to control others, but in the end, it was his own loss of control that led to his ultimate destruction. Michael had once believed that he could escape the truth, but as he sat in the silence of his prison cell, he understood the truth always comes to light, no matter how deeply someone tries to bury it. Would you protect your darkest secret, even if it meant betraying everything you believed in? Or would you confront the truth, no matter the consequences, even if it shattered your world? Michael Anderson's story is a tragic reminder that sometimes the lies we tell ourselves are the ones that destroy us the most. Would you have made the same choices? Or would you have faced the truth and lost everything anyway? Stay tuned for more stories that expose the most shocking crimes and the hidden truths behind them. Don't forget to hit the notification bell, subscribe, share, and follow for more. The truth never dies. It only waits to be uncovered. And you won't want to miss what happens next.